Hello there, Steve Taylor. Very nice to have
Hi.
you on the Polypody Review. How are you?
Yeah, very well, Oliver. Lovely to be chatting to you.
Likewise, likewise. So I just want this to be an informal discussion so people can get to know the real you. And we have a standard question we always start these interviews is like, when did the plants first appear in your life? Was it at a very young age or later? When did you realize this was your path?
Well, that's a question which could take an Aeon to answer.
But from the what's the first memory sort of thing, like, wow.
Well, I think it's like for so many people, it was something which evolved over time.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, from obviously I was brought up in London, but I had relatives in Chichester and spent quite a lot of summers also on the south coast.
Hmm.
So going into the countryside, getting into the woods and fields, all of that kind of thing, in a sense, had always been a bit of an escape. And had been a place where I'd always gone on holiday. So I think it was always, nature and plants were always something that, were an other place for me.
Right.
And something that I mean, it was always somewhere I loved to be. And I think as I went through the usual meal of education and went through all of that and got spat out at the other end, having had enough of that, I really wanted to travel. I had a great desire. So as a lot of young people do.
Yeah.
Um, and then that really, went next period of my life for a decade was really just trying to organize myself to travel to interesting and different places. And I think that, not only do you get to see some amazing places and experience amazing part of the world when you do that, but also even then, I mean, this is back in the 1980s, the level of environmental destruction, was really plain to see. And that really made me feel that having had the benefit, I mean, I had the benefit of having a Western education. I've been to university and I got various qualifications. That with all of those privileges and benefits, rather than just turning it into a money machine to enrich myself, which is all quite nice, I really felt strongly that there was a kind of moral obligation to use those skills in some way to honor and to preserve nature. I mean, that was a sort of core feeling which I had as a young adult. Um, and I was interested in nature and plants, but perhaps the first time I really came across herbs being used as medicine or plants as medicine was really on one of the first travels I did with my partner Zoe. We were traveling at the time in Ecuador, and we'd gone into the Ecuadorian Amazon. And at that point, the road sort of ended at a place where the River Napo
Right.
um, joined another river, and at that point, the road didn't go any further, and you had a village that everyone was basically getting off there, and you had to go in, pirogues and those long canoes down the
Yeah.
Amazon. Um, and so we were sort of holed up there for a while, and we were staying in that pretty typical, what do you call it, frontiers town accommodation,
Yeah.
very very basic, bed bugs in the mattress and rats in the ceiling type of hostel type accommodation. And my partner got really sick. She had a really bad case of dysentery. And anyone who's traveled in those kinds of places knows that if you've got money, you can buy any medicines. There's always
Yeah.
a pharmacy. You've got the money, you buy what you want. And so I kept going to the pharmacy and basically buying stronger and stronger um, conventional treatments for the fact that she was getting sicker and sicker. And things were just getting worse and worse. Um, she got to the point where she's hardly able to drink, and it was very desperate. The hostel we were in, I think it had 1 hour of water a day. So of course it had one
Yeah.
toilet. and once that was blocked, you could imagine what it was like.
Yes.
And then I bumped into another traveller who told me that actually on the edge of the town there was a small pension that was run by a local woman who was half Latino and half native.
Right.
So he said it was really lovely, it was clean, they had their own springs, so there's water all the time. And I went there, found they had a couple of rooms and one of them was free. So I booked the room and literally carried Zoe there, put her in the room, and after about half an hour, the owner of the pension who had spoken to me and asked what was going on returned, and she was carrying a glass, and it was not dissimilar to this actually, a glass with a sort of yellow liquid in it, and she said to me, "Oh, give this to her." And I sort of said, "Well, what is it?" She says plant juice, Sucus de planta. And I just was happy to try anything, and Zoe was too. So I gave her that to drink. And then that night she slept really well, and she didn't wake up, didn't have to go to the loo. Woke up. First thing she said to me when she woke up in the morning was, "Well, I'm hungry. What's for breakfast?"
Oh.
I mean, that was, and it wasn't at that point. I mean, I was very young at that point. It wasn't at that point that I then thought, wow, I'm going to be a herbalist.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think perhaps that was the first really clear seed of the
yes,
possibility of working with plants as particularly as medicines. Um, and it wasn't really for some time later, I've done a lot more traveling, that I actually had was back in the UK. At that point, we knew that we were expecting our first child, and the idea of being able to continually travel obviously was coming to an end.
yes.
Was going to be a lot harder at that point. Like I thought, well, actually, rather than just trying to do odd jobs to earn money to travel, I've got to find something that I'm going to be around, probably rooted in one place, something I can really commit myself to, hopefully something that will earn me a crust and will support me and my family. As something that I feel really is in accordance with how I felt about nature and my role as as a living being on this planet. And it was at that point that someone literally just dropped in front of me a leaflet from the National Institute of Medical Herbalists that they'd picked up at the Chelsea Flower Show, and said, "Oh, I saw this leaflet and I thought of you." Oh, I thought, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting," and that's really how I started to train. I'd sort of looked at conservation. I'd wanted to get into that, but at that time in the late 1980s, it was a very, very small field. Very, very little opportunity there to get involved in anything at a voluntary basis.
Yes.
So yeah, I headed off in the herbal direction from that point onwards, and yeah, still walking that path
And
today.
I know you've written a book, which is a lot about Galenic medicine, humoral medicine, which is based in the classics and medieval times.
Yeah.
How did you get into that side of that particular aspect of herbal medicine?
Well, I think
I'm
for
sure
a
it wasn't
number.
taught at the National Institute of Medical Herbalists, or maybe it was back in the
I
day.
mean, it's not really the very much the basis, or certainly the way when I was training, and it's continued to be the way the basis of the National Institute of Medical Herbalists is a very biomedical approach.
Yes,
Um, and uh, but I think a couple of things had happened during my time before becoming a herbalist. One of the books I had actually come across. I've been gifted a copy of A Modern Herbal by Maud Grieve,
right.
which of course has got a really embraces the wholeness of Western medicine, of Western herbal medicine as it stood really in the
Yeah.
1930s, when it was still an active part of the trade of the country. It was still part of domestic medicine, and to some degree still involved in within conventional pharmaceutical medicine. Plant medicine was still a big part of that. So that was something which had influenced me. But I also had this big, I mean, it really goes back to that experience in the rainforest in Ecuador. How did that woman know that after all the drugs that I had bought, that supposedly were the most powerful things we had to offer, and as a privileged Westerner I could afford to buy, actually were bettered by something that a woman had taken half an hour to collect in the forest? squeeze and then give to me, and it did what none of those drugs could do. So how did she know that? I mean, she was as far as I know, an not an educated person who studied
Right.
pharmacy or herbal medicine or anything like that. This was a folk remedy. So my question was, well, and then when you look at Maud Grieve, well, of course, all of that, even in those books, because everything I was learning as training the herbalist, actually, there was nothing that was contradicting what I'd read in Maud Grieve. And what Maud Grieve was talking about was traditions of use of medicine that really went back to Dioscorides. And obviously there's a lot of global medicine in there too. Um, and nothing that I'd learnt contradicted any of that. In fact, it confirmed it. So I thought, well, hang on a minute, all this stuff seems to have been known before this sort of dependence on analytical chemical investigation of plants.
Yeah.
And that really excited me. That we know this stuff, that humans have always known this stuff. And within my travels, I'd had also a great interest in prehistory and visited some amazing prehistoric sites. So again, there was this, it sort of keyed into my interest in humanity as something which exists as part of this planet, has held this wisdom and knowledge quite clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt, well, as a Westerner, yes, there's a viewpoint that we now have from the viewpoint of Western scientific, analytical rationalism, great, and a great tool. But actually, it's a very narrow pathway
Mm-hmm.
in a very diverse reality within which we live, on this planet. So I felt that to further my to develop and to explore herbal medicine in a way that really, in a sense, sang to me.
Right.
Uh, that was what I was called to.
Yes.
The other interesting thing that happens, and I think a lot of people find this when they do a training course, you spend a lot, maybe 4 years, maybe 5, maybe 6 years, filling yourself with information,
Oh, yes.
learning stuff, and it's stacking up, and but then after about 2 years, you find that all of that retained memory stuff starts to kind of break down a little bit, and you start thinking, oh, well, what was that about? What? And you have a choice at that point. Do you just go back to all those notes, those copious notes that you took? Is that where your knowledge base is held? Or do you grow it as you're growing? And at that point, obviously, you're treating patients. Do you open that up in some way? Which means being fed by your experience, your inspiration, your own personal learning, or do you just turn back to, that source of information coming out of analytical
Yes.
investigation, scientific investigation of herbal medicine, which I think is entirely relevant. And for some people, that is a wonderful river of wisdom that they can follow. But for me, it just didn't do enough. And it also made me feel that I was then, in a sense, dependent upon and having to trust upon other people to do that exploration for me,
Yes.
rather than for me to explore what I was receiving from my patients and what I was learning from them, and how that really fitted in with my own worldview.
Right.
So and after 2 years, well, this was the choice: do you go back to it, or do you explore something else? And a lot of my peers at the time, interestingly, were then actually going off and studying TCM,
Right.
traditional
Yes.
medicine,
Of course. Yes.
or Ayurveda, or one or two did Tibetan medicine. And it was because these things were, in a sense, offering a way of bringing everything that we'd learned together in some kind of unified whole
Yes.
that you would enable you to make connections between people, conditions, diseases, processes, narratives, herbs, plants, the whole thing. It brought it all
Yeah.
together in a way that what we'd been taught really was a bit like a one-horse pony. It didn't give those kinds of connections. I
Yeah.
also felt that I was working energetically. I mean, I had a belief that I was coming from a very energetic, and by energetic, I felt that was more about, the dynamic process of healing, the emotional and mental presentations and how we're working with herbs with that. And although I felt I was addressing that, there was no language that I was able to use to sort of understand that for myself
Yeah.
within Western medicine as I'd been taught within Western herbal medicine. And it wasn't until, when I started to come across the 17th century herbalists, Culpeper, um, and actually it was through Dylan Warren Davis,
Oh, right. Yes.
who at the time had written a lovely book, The Hand Reveals,
Hmm.
which is all about, chiromancy, using the hand in divination.
Yeah, but a lot of that Hermetic philosophy that informed chiromancy, so it was not just about this line means that, it was this is why this line means that within the philosophy.
Yeah. And Dylan gave a lovely lecture to, I was in a student group in London, and gave us a lovely lecture. It was in my last year of being a student, on Culpeper.
Right.
Um, and he simply said, he started off the lecture very clear, saying, who understands all this astrological stuff in Culpeper? And everyone sort of ummed and ahed and said, not sure really. And he said, well, I'll tell you about it. And he then very simply laid out. So he looked at willow, and he said, willow's ruled by the moon. Moon's associated with the water element. The water element is a phlegmatic, it is the phlegmatic humor in the body. The phlegmatic humor rules the joints. The
Right.
rheumatic.
Yeah.
So immediately he showed, and willow's cooling. So immediately he was showing how, with that way of talking about a plant and a condition, a presentation, that through simply knowing something like willow is a cooling herb ruled by the moon, that you
There's
immediately
a
would know all
whole
the
load
stuff
of
about
stuff.
it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And that knowing is open.
Yes.
So it means that then any of your own thoughts that may come up about moon energy or water or water in the body, or what water's doing or not doing, allows you to make the connections with thinking, oh, okay, well, what about this moon herb?
Yes.
Um, is that something that would be appropriate? So instead of shutting things down, so oh, willow salix, it contains salicylates, I'll just use it for that. It means that it suddenly opens up the herb in a multitude of ways,
Yes.
um, and rather than shutting them down through defining them in a more and more narrow way. So going to that, it was like having being given the keys to a golden library.
Right.
um and I'm still reading Culpeper and still
No.
picking my way through and learning, finding new, it's there's so much as soon, because it opens things up. It's not like you learn that book and you put it down.
No.
um Within it, there's always new doorways
Yes.
because of that connection to Hermetic philosophy, astrology, the temperaments, and it just opens us up.
And great news that Dylan has finally, I believe his book is coming out next year on all that. So he's finally managed to finish it, which is like, yes.
I'm
So,
really pleased, really looking forward to it. It'll be a
yes,
fantastic book. He's really been, I mean, I think I would say he's a real authority,
absolutely.
on herbal medicine, and particularly from the mythological,
Yeah.
mystical viewpoint and Hermetic philosophy. He's a lifetime scholar. Has been a huge inspiration in all of my work and writing.
And so do you have I mean, again, this is not something you might want to talk about, but I know you have a great interest in the spirituality of East Africa. Does that come into your work or not so much?
Yeah, more South Africa, more
South
really.
Africa, okay.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I was very lucky because I did spend quite a lot of time there. Interesting, not training with herbalists, but training with, let's just call them, spiritual practitioners.
Okay.
Um, so it was really about the use of ritual within healing and the use of social ritual
Mm-hmm.
through healing ceremonies. Now, herbs are used as part of that. And in the same way that, particularly in those traditions, because everything that we're we're seen to exist in a kind of spiritual soup, let's put it that way.
Yes.
You know, that is the primordial stuff. And it's certainly in from the traditions that I was experiencing, it's sort of verbalized very much within the context of ancestors.
Right.
The ancestral realms cover everything. So we have ancestors of our own lineage, we have ancestors of the land, we have ancestors that we share, that are shared ancestors for all living people, and we also have shared ancestors of nature. And these are all equally our ancestors. Now, interestingly, I also had an opportunity quite a while, before I went to Africa. Actually, I worked with a lovely Romany chap called Jasper Lee, who wrote a book called "We Borrow the Earth,"
Yes.
and he spoke a lot about Romany law, which also very much was very similar. Spoke about what they called the four great ancestors. The earth, the grandfather sky, grandmother earth,
I
who
suppose in,
holds.
in the modern West, there's a tendency when people say ancestor to think, oh, that's dead relatives sort of thing, and it is much more
Yeah,
than that, isn't it?
yeah, 100%. I mean, in the African tradition, it's just one part of our ancestry.
Right.
We're seen through human ancestry to share. We all have the same, in since our blood has come from the same initial human ancestors. And
Right.
that is an ancestry that we share equally to our own familial ancestry. Um, and then you've got the ancestors of the land, the place, and the ancestors of nature around us too, which include the plants and the animals.
Hmm.
So it's a very holistic viewpoint. And in a sense, it's all about bringing everything together, bringing people together, bringing plants together. And I think what I really learned from it was really the potency of these forms of traditional ritual holistic healing. And I think we experience that. We do experience. It's a natural human thing. We experience it when we're all together. You know, I mean, a good example might be a football crowd. You know, the people talk about a spirit that arises. You know, that people feel these things together, or in a great concert, a great gig, and everyone's moving as one. You know, there's something very powerful
Oh,
in these
oh yeah.
comings together. Um, and I was very fortunate to spend a number of years going back to experience these rituals and going through a number of those ritual processes myself. And for me, when I started to look at humoral medicine and Galenic medicine,
Yes.
we know that it really evolved. So when we talk about Hippocrates, Dioscorides,
Yes.
it really evolved within the context of what was known as temple medicine.
Right.
And although there were itinerant healers known as the Asclepiads,
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
who would go around, they were doing herbal healing. They also worked in the temples, so they were a
Yes.
part of the temple therapeutic team. But also in the temples, there would be the therapeutes, who were the ritual holders. And so similar to what you find in Africa, where you have people, you have herbalists who are literally dealing with herbs, and that is seen as a spiritual calling, and usually passed down through a lineage,
Yep.
through apprenticeship. In the same way that those who are the spiritual practitioners, the sangomas, those who sing the songs of the ancestors, is a lineage that may be also familial, but it's also passed down in a teaching lineage. And it seemed clear that actually what I experienced in Africa was very likely to be very similar to exactly the kind of ritual experience that people were going through
Right.
in the temple healing. And similarly, a lot of things were held in Africa that we know were held within the rituals. So the idea of the healing dream, which
Yes.
is central actually still in those African rituals.
Oh, really?
The
And do they have the idea of incubation and things still as well?
very similar. Or the answer, one the main, often individually, one of the main ways of being in contact with the ancestors is through one's dreams.
Right.
And in a way, the prayers that we may make at various places to the ancestors, the offerings, the gifts, those kinds of things that one might make to them, may well be, in a sense, reciprocated
Hmm.
through being given ancestral guidance and wisdom, often through dreams or in a ritual context through the divinations that are given by the ritual practitioners in a trance state with drumming and singing and all of that to enable that. And so, that corresponds exactly to what was going on in the Abaton, in the dreaming chambers of the
Yeah.
ancient temples. Um, so I think that it was a great opportunity, because I felt as a Westerner, I can read about our traditions, our Western traditions, our humoral, our Galenic traditions, but we can't experience them because the lineage is
No.
broken. But actually, by going to Africa and experiencing those things directly, also knowing that it seems that it's, a lot of the temple healing practices were actually coming out of North African
Well,
and
quite, yeah.
Babylonian
Yes.
tribal
Hmm.
tradition. So we know that there's very likely to be a continuity, a cultural
Absolutely. Sort of via
continuity
Egypt and places into Greece sort of thing.
into Greece, but also, we know there was a massive southernward migration of people
Right.
down to Africa.
And
So
do you feel that then you're sort of your ancestors in whatever they're all part of your healing then they're all sort of with you.
I think so, 100%. And
Hmm.
I think that perhaps one of the things that I sort of like to celebrate in my practice is that, it's a gift of all of our ancestors. It's a gift of the ancestors of the people who come to receive herbs. That these things are gifts that are given to us. And we need to have the sense of gratitude, and humility,
Yeah.
for that we're receiving. Um, and we're all sharing this together. We are the children of the plants and the children of the ancestors, and together, we're on a healing journey. And that's very interesting. I mean, a lot of my teachers, and I'm sure you've found this, but I remember when I very first met Christopher Headley, and was doing some training as a student with him. Um, and he said to me, why do you think you're doing this? And I said, well, I think I'm doing it to heal other people. And he said, no, you're doing it to heal yourself.
Yeah, I can.
Well, he sort of said, you're doing it to heal yourself as well.
Well, yes.
This is the point, is that we may not know it, but this is also our healing as practitioners. And that's why there's a great gratitude to the people who come to us as patients,
Yes.
because it becomes part of our healing journey. It's and again, what you find in Africa is that all of these relationships, the cultural and communal relations, they're all reciprocal. It is no one-way relationships. Everything is reciprocal. And so, I believe that very much with my patients, that I'm receiving, in a sense, as much as I give, as well as them
Yeah.
paying me. There's also a great gift in them trusting me,
Well,
and
quite, yeah.
trusting me with the herbs, and
Yes.
and trusting the herbs. Yeah. So
It is interesting that, I mean, on a very small scale, I mean, some years ago, I had to see frequently the hospital doctor. He was an elderly chap, professor. And every time I went to see him, he would come in and he was always frightfully charming, very old school. And he'd always take your blood pressure as a traditional signimeter. And he'd always sound the chest with tapping, etc., etc. Now, I mean, apart from anything else on a practical level, my blood pressure was always 20 points lower or so when he took it because it was such a calming influence. But also it had a ritual sort of, and this is a sort of, I mean, but his doing that almost created a ritual space of like, we're now going to start the consultation. And it's very obvious to me. I try not to see too many doctors these days, but and bless them, all doctors are doing their best, but it's very much more machine-like. There's a much less of the person there. There's nothing to
Yeah.
stop them doing all that, the basic stuff, but they don't. It's a shame, and you get much less of the feeling that you're part of this the healing process rather than just a sort of
Oh,
a
100%.
product of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also, isn't it interesting that the word healing, the very concept healing, has become marginalized and it's seen as a sort of,
Yes.
woke thing or woo-woo thing or something. It's not proper medicine. And I think that's, part of the sort of dichotomy that's happened, over the last 300 years.
Yes, I mean it's interesting. This chap, the same chap again, was and he's head of his field. He was like multiple wards, and he actually said, "Oh, this stuff we're giving you, we actually have no idea what the proper dose is. It's completely different for everybody else, and it's just a bit of an art to do it. We just jiggle it around to get the right amount." But he
Yeah,
was confident enough to be able to say that rather than this, like, "Oh no, we have absolutely like
yeah,
1.3 milligrams per kilo or whatever,"
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
everyone's different.
and one really hopes that for all practitioners, whether they're conventional, orthodox, whatever they are, that we do develop that humility, that actually, every patient's different.
Well, that's
That
what's
we have a starting point, but we don't know the answer for everyone until we have started to work with that and found the way to uncover that for them. Um, and I think that was also quite central to my sort of attraction to humoral medicine, Galenic medicine,
yes.
is that it's much more about the person, about the season, about the place, about the stage of life, about the life experiences, than it is about the pathology.
Absolutely,
The,
absolutely.
the pathology is a secondary consequence, and that means that you know if you're looking from an entirely biomedical approach, pathology comes first. It's working out, you've got a pathology, how do you use something to intervene with that pathology to stop it being pathological. I mean, it's a very simplistic, version of it, but rather than turning it the other way, saying why is this person in this place at this time
Yes,
presenting in this way.
because
And
you're coming from the realm of quality rather than the realm of quantity. We're not counting the red spots
yeah,
on the skin sort of thing.
yeah,
Put it rather crudely, but
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think that's what very much attracted me to it as well. This not to say that Galenic medicine isn't quite as complicated as modern pathology once you get down to the bare bones of it and start drilling down. It's almost infinite levels within levels of it.
yeah. I think there's a, it's a bit like nature.
Yes,
Nature is so complex. It's beyond complexity,
yes,
but it's also really simple. You know,
absolutely.
the sun sets and it's winter and the leaves fall off the trees.
Yes,
Plants grow if you feed the soil. On one level, it is very, very simple, and it's also very accessible.
yes,
And that's the
absolutely.
lovely thing about when you're looking at those ways of looking at the world, by just saying, okay, we're going to talk about 4 elements or 5 elements, including ether. We can talk about those. That may seem very simple. On one level, that is very simple. You can ask a question: is the cause of this problem a hot or cold cause? It's as simple as that.
Simply, yeah,
Get that right. Get that right. And whatever you do, if you're always ensuring that you're responding to the coldness behind the problem,
yeah,
and you're always holding on to that, then something you're doing is always going to be the right thing.
right.
May not be the full story, but get that right. And so it also means that instead of looking at 5,000 known anti-inflammatory herbs, when we've got a patient, we say, do we need a warming anti-inflammatory? Fever few, rosemary, for instance, good examples,
Yeah,
or a cooling anti-inflammatory. We've already spoken about one, willow.
yes,
Immediately we've got that kind of
control.
answer. We've got
Yes,
that
yeah,
kind of ability to find a narrative in what we're doing and a way forward when we're working with a patient, so that when one thing comes up or changes, we say, oh, okay, why is that change? What's it telling us? And now what does that push us into doing next?
yes.
I think it also really opens it up as well, because it then says, well, okay, there may be a multitude of other reasons why you choose rosemary or feverfew as your warming anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
One's Galenic, hermetic, one's ruled by Venus and one's
Yeah.
ruled by the sun. So that may be a reason why you've gone for one or the other.
Yeah.
Um, so it gives it gives stories to everything. And in my book, I talk a lot about this idea of mythos. That's the non-rational,
Yeah.
which in somehow feeds our ability or our opportunity to gain some kind of wisdom over what we're doing. It's not saying that's the whole story, that all you do is sing songs, write poetry, and be wonderfully intuitive. Yeah, sure, but you need to know the basis. You need to know the foundation. You need to know where you'll stand. You need the rational.
Now, Steve, so just going slightly on a tangent here, I know obviously like most modern herbalists use tinctures, but I also know you make your own pills and you're very keen on teas and things and other ways of administering herbs. Is that coming from that area that like sometimes a pill might be actually better than a tincture or because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at traditional medicine. Of course, the forms of medicines that are used is vast.
Yes.
And you go to some parts of the world where actually there's we say Western herbalists tend to use tinctures. If you go to some parts of the world, for instance, they mainly, or use mainly, but in a great amount, they might use a particular form of application of medicine. So, for instance, it's very common. I mean, in South and Central America, particularly South America, steaming.
Right.
You find that used a lot in Africa as well. Using washings, using herbal washes. Obviously, poultices. There's a these things are mainstays of medicine. Things we're very unfamiliar with
Yes.
within the way we work with them from a Western perspective or Western biomedical perspective. And there's also a correspondence between the vehicle we're using and the energy of that medicine. So, I mean, a good example would be that Culpeper said that if you want to treat the passages, so the passages are, all of the respiratory passages, urinary passages, digestive passages, they're all traditionally would be said to be phlegmatic, watery.
Right. Yes.
Uh, they're under the rulership of Venus or the moon, mainly Venus. Um, and he said to treat those, you best use infusions and decoctions because they go quickly into the passages and they're quickly through and out the passages.
Right.
And of course, if you think about it, they're already in the medium of those passages, which is water.
Yes.
So obviously, if you think about it intuitively, if you've got a very, for instance, if you've got a very, you've got some gastric erosion, or you've got, esophageal erosion, had really bad heartburn for years, and every time you eat anything, it
Yes.
causes heartburn. I mean, you drink alcohol, well, that's going to set it off.
Yes.
You drink a nice cold tea, it's going to cool immediately. It doesn't matter, cold water will do that, will cool it down. So of course you can just see from a very, empirical approach, actually the vehicle of a medicine is, and even the more attractive, I almost say that's more important than the choice.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, you've got to be using a hot herb when it needs that to be warmed up rather than the cold one. But which hot herb you choose is probably way less important than actually using a medium that carries, in a sense, that energy
Right.
through, takes it to the part of the body that you're trying to get to. So yes, I'll use things like I've got, things like I might give people little jars with some cotton wool, and I'll put some essential oils in, and they'll use them, aromatically. I'll use a lot of teas, a lot of decoctions. You can see I've got lots and lots of teas on my shelf. I make my own little pills. I've got some. Sorry, bag of pills here. So yes, I make my own
Yes.
little pills.
And what's in those, Steve?
These ones, these particular ones I've just happened to grab, are rose, hawthorn, and melissa.
Oh, lovely.
So it's really very much what I'd call a cordial mix.
That's
So
it.
a mix for the heart.
Yes, and that's on all levels. That'd be sort of emotional, physical, spiritual sort of thing.
So they're very much these ones are you. I often talk to people. This is really they will enable you to let go of difficult emotions which are embedding themselves, within your heart and your emotions in your
Yeah.
psyche. So they're really a releasing. They're a remedy to release stress and tension. So you might use them in a very hot choleric person. In fact, I did. I remember one I had, who was a wonderful get things done. Their whole life getting things done for everyone else, but still getting things done. And of course, during that time, had just not had the space to release and let go of emotional build-up.
Yes.
And then because they were the getting things done person, everyone expected them and just piled more and more on.
Yes.
And I remember I gave her some of these. And 3 weeks later, she came back and she said, I said, how have you been? She said, I haven't been able to stop crying. I've been crying for 3 weeks. I said, oh, I'm really sorry. She said, oh, no, it's good. It's good. Good. I've been crying. I can't remember the last time I cried. I've just been crying. So, it was wonderful to see that release and that simple thing that I'd done. And actually, we were treating all kinds of other things. She had more autoimmune conditions and all kinds of other stuff going on. But actually, that for her had been the most powerful thing and it had changed everything.
Right.
Um, and Yes, it had been a very simple use actually of those pills. And when you look at pills, for instance, it was said that if you want to get to the deeper organs, now that is the heart, but particularly also the head, because they're quite remote from the digestion, that, if you drink this or, you sniff that, although the brain obviously is quite close to the
Yeah.
olfactory blood, so you can affect through the ether and the etheric element in the brain. But they said particularly when you really wanted to penetrate deeply into those those
Yeah.
remote organs, you would use pills because pills were seen to sit longer in the body and therefore go much deeper. And of course, a pill is different to capsules. I have capsules as well, but capsules are energetically quite good because they disperse in the stomach.
Right.
Now there is obviously the moisture of the stomach, etc., has to start absorbing and infusing everything, and then get through the gut wall, etc., etc. So they are a lot slower than a tincture or a tea or a decoction, but they're much faster than a pill. So if you think about it, these pills, probably making their way right the way through even the small intestine, right into the large intestine. So you've got this really long, gentle,
Right.
slow release with a pill.
Rather like a
Whereas,
sort of digestive gobstopper that gets smaller and
yeah,
smaller and
and in a
smaller.
sense, if you want to deal with the stomach, you probably aren't going to do a pill because it won't
Yeah.
even break open in the stomach.
Right.
So immediately you're starting to think about, and again, when you look at traditional forms of medicine, poulticing, something that we're not really taught much as Western
No.
herbalists. Um, Poulticing was a big way of using remedies because the idea is you can go directly to an organ by poulticing over
Well,
it.
over it, of course, yes.
A lot of the treatments for the heart were done through a poultice on the heart. Um, so we've sort of forgotten a lot about these many ways and actually, if you want to go straight to the heart, why not go straight to the
Well,
heart?
quite, yes, yeah.
Rather than put it in the stomach, send it to give it to the blood. Fine, yeah, you'll still get to the heart that way. But I've had patients, for instance, who use capsicum a lot. Patients with heart failure make a lot of use of capsicum, and will use it as tincture in drops in water and sip that
Right.
and things like that, anginal pain. But actually, also and more effectively, put it directly on literally 3 or 4 drops of the tincture
On the
um,
heart area.
over the heart. And it is profoundly effective and particularly good for that kind of cramping.
Right.
angina type pain. So, but also you've got a safety element there because it's external. You're not worrying about what
Yes.
drugs they're on or interfering with other processes. So, there's so many, and I think probably the more I work, in a sense, the more I see the importance of getting that part of the treatment right. And of course, there's always a place, for tinctures. They do what they say, but they are very hot. They are very cutting.
Yes.
They're very good at, clearing cold, damp congestion. They're very good for enlivening the body and stirring up the innate heat, activating organs. I mean, there's lots of fantastic stuff about tinctures, but I find that in the same way that there's, four elements, so you could say maybe they're only represent about a quarter of what goes out of my dispensary.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, one last question I always have for everybody. I mean, obviously, as a herbalist, we love all herbs, etc. But is there one particular herb or that you feel particularly close to that almost like, oh yes, whenever you see it, you think, oh yes.
It's it's such a, you always get asked this question, and it's a pretty impossible question to
I know, it's very cruel. All the other herbs would be terribly upset.
Well, they would be, and you never know when you with every on any day what you may uncover about a
Right.
herb. So I mean, some interesting ones. I mean, and I think often seasonally, I'm really attracted to one herb more than another. So this is the season where, for instance, I use hawthorn berry, but I literally, fortunately, when I out on my walks and things, there's a lot of hawthorn around, and I have a little tradition of, if I come across a hawthorn tree, the first one I come to, I take 3 berries. Goes back to some lovely folk stories about the three
Right.
magic berries. But anyway, so that's what I do, and I think at this time of year, I think when you look at what the plants are offering you. And what I
Yes.
found about that is that it's really helped me. And I think that's something I've learned more and more about the seasonal use of herbs. So when we were talking about the pills and the hawthorn in these pills, that I make those pills only from herbs that I've collected myself. And the hawthorn I use in that is from the May blossom.
Right.
With some leaves, but it's mainly blossoms and young leaves. And for me, that's very much is associated with particularly emotionally release. It's the release from the winter.
Yes.
Um, it's the letting go and releasing the spirit, releasing the spring to rise once again. And of course, we talk about the May blossom and the Roman goddess Maya, and the May Queen and Olwen, and there's all these lovely stories there
Yes.
about how she's returning and how that life is returning through the release of the grasp, the claw of winter.
Yes.
So I feel that hawthorn in the spring is very much about release, and yet in the autumn, of course, we know that hawthorn's also associated with protection. There's lovely stories about going creeping under a thorn to protect yourself in a
Yes.
storm, and all the stories of protection and its relationship with the great giant Dispadaden, who was someone who is kind of great club and it is protecting Alwyn. So there's this protection story to do with hawthorn, and then you look at Chinese medicine and they talk about the heart protector. It's an organ, the heart
Right.
protector. So we've got this aspect of the heart as well. And so when I take those berries, I think about them becoming heart protection.
Yes.
So as we go through the winter, everything in the winter is about protecting. You're protecting your heat, you're protecting your spirit. We talk about winter melancholy. We need to protect the spirit within us, within the heart, so it doesn't become overcome by the winter melancholy. We don't get sad. So as well as using those uplifting remedies, we need protection. And so this time of year, I'd say that one of my little favorite plants when I walk out the door is hawthorn.
It is.
Um,
And it was a particularly
and
good crop this year. Well, around here it was
wonderful.
extraordinary. The hawthorn was.
Wonderfully. So yeah, I'm going to sort of dodge that bullet.
I think absolutely, you're absolutely allowed to dodge that question. But that was very interesting anyway. And Steve Taylor, thank you so much for talking to us on Polypody Review. That was absolutely fascinating. I hope to have you back some other time. There's 1,000 topics we haven't talked about. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you very much, Ollie.